Reading from Romans 12:1 to 2, 9 through 21. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with the Lord's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position. Do not be conceited. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Do not take revenge, dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath, for it is written, "It is mine to avenge, I will repay," says the Lord. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good.
So good morning. I am Kathy Kipp, and I am the Minister of Spiritual Formation here at Community Church. Our senior pastor is on vacation, visiting family this week, and will be back next week, along with our new director of music, who will be here. Emma Witten will welcome, so be sure to come back next week. So this morning, I want to share with you a little story that about a discussion that I started with the teens one Sunday. And I asked them this question: what would you do if your doctor told you that you had only 24 hours to live? Now, the teens' responses were typically be with friends and family. But the discussion came a little undone when one 14-year-old said, "I'd get a second opinion." So this morning, when you hear Paul say to us, "Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice," do you want to get a second opinion? Paul tells us, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." Well, it's summertime, and for the church, this means we're smack in the middle of the season that we call ordinary time, the longest season of the church year, running from June through October. But don't let the name fool you. This is no ordinary time at all. It's a season of incredible growth where everything around us is lush and green, just like the color of our pyramids. Fun little fact, that's why our pyramids are green. During ordinary time, the scriptures shift their focus to Jesus' teaching about following God in our everyday lives. So it's a perfect opportunity to work on those spiritual growth. The idea behind practicing spiritual disciplines is to feel God's love. And when we truly feel that love, it changes us. Little by little, we start to think more like God, and then we serve and love more fully, just as Christ showed us. So let's dive into this season of growth with all our hearts and let God's love change us from the inside out. Today, you are going to change on purpose or by accident. a little or a lot. By the time you get to the end of this day, you will have one day of change behind you. And by the way, you'll never get this day back. Now, in this world, not many people care very much about your motivation. What they're interested in are your results. What have you achieved? What have you accomplished? However, in our spiritual lives, motivation is crucial. What we value and desire is tightly bound to how we feel, and it greatly influences our actions, behavior, and way of living. If our actions aren't in sync with our motivations, we might manage to keep it up for a while, but eventually the incongruity will seep out in ways that are often unpleasant and unhealthy for us and for those around us. Our motivation is like a guiding rope that pulls or pushes us into action. It becomes especially crucial when facing tough or challenging times, tethering us, and preventing us from getting hopelessly lost. So Parker Palmer, who was an author, educator, and activist, tells a story about farmers in the Midwest who faced brutal winters and blinding blizzards. When a blizzard would come, often they would come quickly and were very dangerous. Anybody from that part of the country that's ever experienced that? Yeah, a few of you. A person caught in one could not even see the hand at the end of their arm. And many farmers trying to make their way back home would wander in circles, completely disoriented, and it was not an unusual occurrence for some to freeze to death a few feet from the door to their house. Those who learned from such tragedies would prepare for the brutal winter blizzards, which they knew would come. And they did this by tying a rope from the back door of their house to the barn. And when the blizzards came, the rope became their literal lifeline that would guide them home to warmth and safety. To this day, meteorologists in the Midwest and Canada advise farmers to tie a rope to their home and grasp the other end firmly when venturing outside to avoid getting lost in a blinding blizzard. In this world, there are blizzards all around us, and very few of us have a rope. And if we do have a rope, do we know what it is tied to? So why are you at Corona Del Mar Community Church this morning? Does it make any difference if you're here, or if you were at some other church this morning, or at no church this morning? When we're members of something, some of the ropes we cling to were tied before we ever came along. So it's helpful to be reminded of some of these ropes, and we get to decide if we want to hang on to those ropes or tie our ropes to other anchor points. Now, the Congregational Church, the denominational tradition that became the United Church of Christ, has a history of firsts that you may not know. A history of paying attention to the ropes to which we are denominationally attached is often in the often blinding blizzards of life, a history of listening to the still speaking God to discern what is called for a particular moment in time. So here are a few firsts I want to share with you from the UCC. In 1785, Lemuel Haynes became the first Black man to be ordained as a minister in the United States. In 1853, Antoinette Brown became the first female to be ordained a minister in the United States, and a move that affirmed a woman's right to preach the gospel. In 1972, William R. Johnson became the first openly gay person to be ordained as a minister in the United States. And the UCC General Synod that same year urged equal rights for homosexual citizens and called on congregations to welcome gay, lesbian, and bisexual members. In 1976, the General Synod elected Reverend Joseph H. Evans, president of the United Church of Christ, and he became the first Black leader of a racially integrated mainline church in the United States. And that is just some of the heritage and traditions of the UCC. You can go online and find some other firsts if you're curious. The denomination that we're tied to. So how does that relate to us today? Why are you at Corona Del Mar Community Congregational Church this morning? The Rabbi Gamaliel, a contemporary of Jesus, and the Apostle Paul's teacher and mentor, knew about motivation. In the book of Acts, when Peter and the apostles were arrested for teaching in Jesus' name, Gamaliel said, "So in the present case, I tell you, keep away from these men and let them alone. Because if this plan or this undertaking is of human origin, it will fail. But if it is of God, you will not be able to overthrow them. In that case, you may even be found fighting against God." If the reasons we're here today are of human origin, they will fail us. But if they are from God, they will not be able to be overthrown. So today, you are going to change on purpose or by accident, a lot or a little. By the time you get to the end of this day, you'll have one day of change behind you. And by the way, you will never get this day back. How do we change on purpose and not just by accident? So all of us are being spiritually formed every day of our lives, whether we pay attention to the formation process or not. The people you associate with, the books you read, the media you consume, the music you listen to, the thoughts that fill your mind every day and every night, and the way you do these things, these are the things that form you. The more awareness and intentionality you bring to this process, the more you will be formed on purpose. So there are lots of practical ways to engage in intentional spiritual formation. And since we can't talk about all of them this morning, I wanted to share one concept for all of us to try on for a time, and let's see where it takes us. The spiritual discipline of getting to know yourself. Awareness of yourself and your relationship with God is intricately related. In fact, the challenge to shed our old false self in order to live authentically in our new self strikes at the very core of authentic spirituality. So if you think this self-awareness is self-absorption or selfish or a product of our modern times, I want you to consider the reflections from these giants of faith over the century. In 400 AD, Augustine wrote, "How can you draw close to God when you are far from your very own self?" He prayed, "God, grant me that I may know myself, that I may know thee." In the 13th century, Meister Eckhart wrote, "None can know God who does not first know himself." In the 16th century, Teresa of Avila, a Carmelite nun, wrote, "Almost all problems in the spiritual life stem from lack of self-knowledge." Also in the 16th century, John Calvin wrote, "Our wisdom consists almost entirely of two parts, the knowledge of God and of ourselves. But as these are connected together by many ties, it's not easy to determine which of the two precedes and gives birth to the other." Throughout all of human history, and it's still true today, most people will go to their graves not knowing who they are. They unconsciously live someone else's life or someone else's expectations of the life they live. The journey of discovering who you truly are, created in the image of God, is an ongoing and never-ending pursuit. Embracing this awareness is crucial for spiritual growth and fulfillment. So sometimes it is the wisdom of youth that truly know its identity, straight out of the mouths of babes. Take Cami Granato, for instance. When she was just a young girl, she knew deep in her heart that she wanted to be a hockey player, even though it was unheard of for girls to play hockey back then. But guess what? In 1998, she went on to captain the U.S. team, the Olympic team, and secured a gold medal in the very first women's Olympic hockey tournament. And she didn't stop there. Cami became the all-time leading scorer for the U.S. women's team in international hockey, making history in the sport. In 2010, she added another milestone by becoming the first woman ever to be inducted into the prestigious Hockey Hall of Fame, standing tall among the legends of the game. Then in 2019, she broke barriers once again when she was hired as the first female scout for the Seattle Kraken. And guess what? She didn't stop breaking glass ceilings there either. In 2022, she made history again by becoming the NHL assistant general manager for the Vancouver Canucks. Can you believe it? A trailblazer, a game changer, an inspiration to us all. Cammie's journey is a powerful reminder that we each have a unique calling, that no dream is too big, no barrier is too daunting, if you have the passion and courage to chase after it. Now, how many of you have seen the Barbie movie? Don't be embarrassed. All right. Tina Hoover brought it up to me last week and said it was very deep and amazing and I needed to go to see it. So, you are going to love this when you see that there is a you can be anything girl hockey player Barbie who looks very much like Cammie Granado. Is that the greatest? Ah, yes. So, what does it mean to begin training in the spiritual life? Well, any kind of training requires a place and a space that brings us close to the thing that we're learning. If you're going to learn an instrument, you need a place to practice, and you need the right things to change your place into a practice space. You need an instrument, you need music, a metronome probably, and a plan. And if you're going to learn to paint, you need a place that has paper, paintbrushes, and paint. Training requires a place and a space that brings us close to the thing that we are learning. Now, this sanctuary is a beautiful place to feel God's love, and it's full of things that lead us into God's presence. God doesn't live somewhere up there far away from our daily lives. This sanctuary, this place and space, is to help us to remember that God is here with us, in us, and for us. He walks with us, eats with us, cries and laughs, and hangs out with us. Emmanuel means God with us. The intention of spiritual disciplines is to have intimacy with God every day, here, now. So, an assignment, if you choose to accept it, when you go home today, pick a place and make a space to practice spiritual disciplines, your own special sanctuary. Now, if you already have this, go there and give thanks. Where in your home can you train in feeling God's love? What can you put in that place to help lead you to God's love? Go home and make your place and space. And finally, training is daily. You don't have a flourishing business if you only pay attention now and again. Olympians win gold medals because of regular training. If you want to improve your health, you have to pay attention every day. It's the same for spiritual disciplines. Take time daily to feel God's love. It's the everyday that makes the difference. So here is the next part of your assignment. Take 5 minutes of silent prayer a day. Sit still and feel God's love. Not to ask, not to be grateful, just to feel God's love. And no more than 5 minutes. Keep a log of the time of day when you start and stop. And if 5 minutes is too much, start with 3. And if it's helpful, find an accountability partner. Training for the spiritual life isn't about harder or more. It's about being wise. So start with the minutes that will work. This week, I recommend 5 minutes every day to sit silently and wait to feel God's love. Relationships take time. Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, Christianity without discipleship is always Christianity without Christ. And if you're thinking what could possibly come out of spending only 5 minutes a day on this, well, you might be surprised. The other night, as I was going to sleep, I did the math in my head. And 5 minutes a day for a year means that by the end of 1 year, you will have spent over 30 hours. 30 hours and 25 minutes to be exact in God's loving presence. At Jesus' baptism, he heard, "You are my beloved Son, and in you I take delight." Every one of us is also God's beloved son or daughter, and God takes delight in each of us. As we bask in God's living presence, it's natural for emotions to surface. Yet we are not meant to be slaves to our emotions or to cater to every whim. Instead, we seek to align ourselves with God's will and purpose for our lives, submitting to his loving rule. However, there's danger of losing sight of who we really are if we remain unaware of the unique individuals God has created us to be. And if we do not know who we are, as we have been made by God, and as we have been formed throughout our lives, we often end up wearing a mask before others to be sure, and even before God. A mask that camouflages or obscures who we really are. In their book, The Cry of the Soul, Dan Allender and Temper Longman write why understanding our feelings is vital. They write, ignoring our emotions is turning our back on reality. Listening to our emotions ushers us into reality. And reality is where we meet God. Emotions are the language of the soul. They are the cry that gives the heart a voice. However, we often turn a deaf ear through emotional denial, distortion, or disengagement. We strain out anything disturbing in order to gain tenuous control of our inner world. We are frightened and ashamed of what leaks into our consciousness. In neglecting our intense emotions, we are false to ourselves and lose a wonderful opportunity to know God. We forget that change comes through brutal honesty and vulnerability before God. Feeling the full range of our God-given emotions is a critical component of the hard work of discipleship. For Jesus, before he performed any miracles, before he healed anyone, he heard that he was completely beloved by God. And I think the same is true for us. The first step is knowing you are loved. For Jesus, after his baptism and before he began his public ministry, he went into the wilderness and faced 3 temptations. The temptation of performance, you are what you do. Possessions, you are what you have. And popularity, you are what people think of you. They outline the 3 false identities or masks that we are offered almost every single day, urging us to define ourselves by worldly standards rather than by the boundless love and acceptance that God offers us. Real freedom is when we don't crave being someone extraordinary in the eyes of others, because deep down, we truly believe we are lovable and more than enough just as we are. These temptations are the invitation to put on a mask of who we think the world wants us to be. They're an invitation to hide behind the masks and to hide what God has called us to be. And yet, we are also to be God's beloved sons and daughters, to be our true and authentic selves. What are we to do about that? Today, you are going to change on purpose or by accident, a little or a lot. By the time you get to the end of this day, you will have one day of change behind you. And by the way, you will never get this day back. John Ortberg, in his Reflections on Change, encourages us to choose your masks carefully. He says, with a person, motive matters deeply. Don't deny when we run into impure motives. Don't indulge them. Don't dwell on them overly long. Just be curious about them. Be aware of them. And then pay attention to our motives. We can't choose our motives because motives are an emotional reality. However, we can choose our actions, but we can't choose our motives. Here's what I can do. I can act as if I were a person of good character. I can act as if I were somebody who was generous. Frederick Buechner shares a story called The Happy Hypocrite. It's a story about a rake named Lord George Hell. Debauched and profligate, he falls in love with a saintly girl. And in order to win her love, he covers his bloated features with a mask of a saint. The girl is deceived, and she becomes his bride. They live together happily until a wicked lady from Lord George Hell's past shows up, who exposes him for the scoundrel she knows him to be, and challenges him to take off his mask. So sadly, having no choice, he takes it off, and lo and behold, beneath the saint's mask is the face of the saint he has become by wearing it in love. So choose your mask carefully. Live today as if you have the virtue of humility, or the virtue of generosity, or the virtue of honesty. What would somebody do if they had good character? And we can choose to enter into that act. That story is called The Happy Hypocrite. Now, you might wonder what's the difference between being a hypocrite versus acting as if. And that's a good question. A hypocrite has no intention of becoming what they are pretending to be. But if we act as if, we have a different posture of the will. Our goal is not to fool other people and make them think we are different than we actually are. We're living with a surrendered will, a living sacrifice. And we want to become honest people, so we ask for God's help. And here's the other key. We are not able to change our character. It's always a miracle when it happens. Lord George Hell takes off the mask, and miracle of miracles, he has become what it is he was trying to live as if he was the saint he wanted to become. You know why? I believe it was because his heart was aligned with God's will. Sometimes we grow and we learn, and we develop by pretending. Just like when we teach little children to speak. We pretend they understand until one day they really do. Similarly, I think God sees the higher person we can become, the person he created us to be in his image, even though we're not there yet. So as we humbly act as if, seeking God's help, taking time to listen, change can happen. And it is a beautiful thing, a miracle, in fact. I can't. God can. I think I'll let him. Today is your day for change. Step into it with courage and embrace the miracle that awaits you. Go ahead. Be transformed. Amen.